Great. So welcome, everyone. I'm Lois, the GA for the Center for Indigenous Educational Research at OISE. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Student Speaker Series. This series will continue throughout this semester, so please be sure to keep an eye out for upcoming invites and emails about the series. And you can also check back regularly to the Eventbrite page as well. So for some logistics, please kindly keep yourself on mute during Ian's presentation, but feel free to type any questions or comments into the chat throughout the session, and we will be monitoring it throughout the session. So at the end, we'll have a question and answer session where we can open the floor. So I would also like to open with a land acknowledgement. So we are all spread out around the globe these days, so I invite everyone to reflect on the land that you're currently on. And if you would like, please feel free to share it in the chat where you're joining us from. So some of you may be on traditional lands where your ancestors have lived since time immemorial. For others, like myself, you may have arrived to the land you're currently on recently or been born there after your family arrived some generations before you. So personally, I am currently in Colombia in South America on the traditional lands of the Muisca people, and I'm very grateful to be living on this land, but it is necessary to acknowledge that this land and its people, like many across the world, such as those of Turtle Island, where we find the University of Toronto, were subjected to ideological, physical, emotional, and spiritual violence of colonizers and settlers. However, this is not only a historic event, and colonialism is still very much alive today. Despite this, Indigenous communities around the world continue to resist these harmful forces and continue to stand at the front lines of cultural and environmental protection and social justice. As a settler on this land, I thus acknowledge my own responsibility to the land, to the Indigenous peoples of the lands that I find myself on, and also to the learning and unlearning that I must do to likewise resist harmful narratives of modern day colonialism and to work instead towards responsible and reciprocal relationships. Now, in the spirit of relationship building and community, we have the wonderful opportunity to hear about and engage with a very important and timely topic: Indigenous language work, teaching, and distance learning, sharing ideas and practice from work during the COVID-19 pandemic. So speaking on this, I'm very happy to welcome our student speaker, Ian McCallum. Ian is a PhD student at the University of Toronto and is currently researching the best strategies for Munsee language revitalization. He's also an education officer for the Indigenous Education Office of the Ministry of Education, and he's worked in this field for over 20 years. So thank you so much, Ian, for being here today, and I'll leave it over to you.
Anishik, Lois, I appreciate the introduction. Before I begin, I also wanted just to thank my home community, which is the Munsee-Delaware Nation. I'll also extend some thank yous to the people who've helped me out along the way. So I wanted to acknowledge my mom is watching, and oftentimes as someone who's been in this world a long time, I often wonder, you know, it's a very tough position to be in Indigenous education and to what we call fight the good fight every day. But without her guidance and her encouragement, you know, this probably wouldn't be possible at this point. So I wanted to extend that, and to others who've you know, inspired me, my family who's inspired me along the way. So with that, I'd like to share sort of my thoughts and how things are working in terms of working with an Indigenous language that is that would be classified as endangered. So the title of my presentation, Halanik So Palito Walakan, is a translation of trying to bring an Indigenous language to sort of offer a translation to teaching online or learning online. So the translation actually works, so speak the language over a strong wind. And with that, I'll begin. What's important is that I also include a land acknowledgement, because I'm actually speaking on this Zoom call from just north of Toronto, so between Barrie and Orillia. So with that, I'll say, Nishik Wishap Wewak Minjikaning Wak Chimnasing Ni Nwanasawisi, which means, you know, I give thanks to the Chippewa people of Rama First Nation and Christian Island for what has been a long visit. So I'm living with them, and I've lived with them on their territory for a long time. I'll also say Nishik Lapawewak Nahi Wak Nalahi Nialangomatit, which means I'm going to say thanks to the Lenape people of both Munsee-Delaware, my home community, and also of Moraviantown, which is the other Munsee community here in Ontario. I also wanted to thank all my relations. I'll do a formal introduction of myself in the language, the Munsee language, before I start this slideshow. So I'll say, Nishi ki shalamochwang, el milyang yonkwa kishkwik, ni dashinzi ian, ni non jai nalahi, dalingamawak takwa, Shuknawikian, Barrie, Ontario. So I thank the creator. I explained that who I am. I'm a member of the Turtle Clan. I'm from a community up the river, which is on the Thames River in southwestern Ontario, and that I currently live, my house is located near Barrie, Ontario. Part of working with Indigenous languages and this presentation is, while it is somewhat of my research as a PhD student, this has been my existence for quite some time. So I sort of struggled in terms of something that defines Indigenous language, but also doing the research with it. And I could find a couple of quotes that were really important, because it actually kind of lets me off the hook in terms of having those essays in on time. And I think part of waking up every day as an Indigenous person, working and trying to bring a language back from the endangered category, is that learning and speaking Indigenous languages are acts of decolonization. And I'm a big fan of Noah McKeever's work from the University of Victoria. The piece that lets me off the hook in terms of having essays in on time and really actually having mounds of material is that with Leanne Hinton, she mentioned people are so busy doing language revitalization that they're too busy to write about it. And the truth of the matter is that we have language class on Tuesdays and Friday evenings, but the preparation in terms of preparing materials for those classes usually does take up quite a lot of time of my non-working, my non-employment time. There's just simply a lack of opportunity to clear the space and go, okay, I'm going to write about what's been happening. So this slideshow, I guess, is a small way in which I'm actually addressing that last quote. It's important that I offer who the Munsee people are and my home community, simply because they are a smaller group of Indigenous people here in Ontario, when in comparison to the Ojibwe people, the Chippewa, the Odawa, the Potawatomi, as well as the Haudenosaunee, the Six Nations. The Munsee people go by different names. So you have the Munsee, Lenape, or the Delaware would be ways that they would be identified here in Ontario. Their traditional homelands were on the eastern seaboard of this continent, so would be the modern states of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. 400 years of contact and war and disease and forced migration have brought the Munsee people to Ontario. And in about 1780, the Munsee people settled at Grand River here in Ontario. In fact, there is a story that they were the first to cross the Niagara River when they weren't supposed to, because of course the British government wanted to settle treaties and have land ready. But they settled in the Grand River first in about 1780, and then they made their way to the Thames River area just southwest of London, Ontario, modern day London, Ontario, a location known as Munsee-Town. There's another Delaware community, which is at Moraviantown, just east of Chatham, east of Thamesville. which was established in 1790, and they came across on the Detroit River. There are 3 historic communities in Ontario. There are some Delaware people at 6 nations, Munsee-Delaware Nation, and then the Delaware Nation as well. There's been a long history of displacement. So in the War of 1812, the community was displaced, and many of the people had to go to Burlington, Ontario. We've had a residential school close by, that being Mount Elgin, that ran for almost 100 years. Of course, the Indian Act, the Official Languages Act, enfranchisement, 60 Scoop, CAS, and the lack of opportunities have all had an impact on the traditional language of the Munsee people. So the current stats for the language, we have 1 first language speaker who's now in her 80s. I had the opportunity about 25 years ago to learn language from her. She lives at the Delaware community at Moraviantown. There are probably between 50 and 100 second language speakers of Muncie of different capabilities. So that would be including the kids that would go to the schools to learn Muncie, but also the adult programs that occur on both reserves. It is a very distinct language. It is close to Anishinaabemowin or Ojibwe. So there's some words, there's some crossover that could be understood, but it has its own distinct, its own distinct language. We are a distinct community that is surrounded by the Chippewa of the Thames, who outnumber us by population and also by size of community. Across the river, we have the Oneida Nation of the Thames as well. So both those 2 communities have more community members than we do. And of course, over the years, lots of people have relations from all 3 or all 2 different groups. We have a dictionary that has detailed our language, and that was brought out in the mid-1990s. We also have a lot of archival print material in the Munsee language. So it was well documented in the 1840s, 1850s, when missionaries came to our community, they wanted to create bilingual texts in order to support the work that they were doing on our community. We have an Ontario curriculum document. So the language is actually taught currently in Lambton Kent District School Board and Thames Valley District School Board. And we also have a wealth of community print resources, both on Munsee-Delaware Nation and as well as Moraviantown. I thought I'd sort of connect it personally and with my family. The home that you see there is a family photo where 3 generations of my family would have spoken the Munsee language. And the building's significant in the fact that it still exists. You can actually go and see it. But it also marks where the language was spoken fluently. It would have been the first language of those who lived in the building. And then it marked a point in the 1800s where it would have been a bilingual household, where both Munsee and the English language was spoken. And at the end of its usage by the family, it probably was an English-dominated household. So it actually reflects the movement of language on our community, in terms of the Indigenous language being slowly eroded in terms of use on a daily basis, and then replaced, of course, by the English language. Also encapsulated with that building would have also been the rate of fluency, the assessment by which someone is a speaker, and then, of course, all of those stories, the cultural connection, the history of the community, and the religion would have all been talked about in that building, which makes it very significant in terms of hearing what those walls could say to you in a present day. All of those different things, plus also the evolution of speaking a certain language on the community. The last community first language speaker on Muncie passed away in the early 1990s. And our current population is 150, and on reserve we have a total population of about 750. So we're not a very large community when it comes to comparison with other First Nation communities here in Ontario and across Canada. In the last 10 years, so Wimbat Katunuk means 10 years, we have, it's been quite a flurry of action, I must admit, and it's been very busy. We've held weekly classes, so my colleague, Karen Moscow, who lives on reserve, has taught weekly classes for at least the last 6 years, maybe even 7. We have included the language in our traditional gatherings, which our powwow is held in the July long weekend, or at the beginning of July. We have held sessions at our community center that highlight language, history, practice. We try to tie those in. We also have things that we would be doing traditionally, so by the calendar. So whether with maple syrup coming up soon, we've tried to connect the language with traditional practice. We've done a lot of language documentation through stories, but also through print material creation. So just trying to get the material out that community members can use and can access. My colleague has obtained language teacher certification, and while that doesn't seem undaunting, what happens is that because the language is not spoken by very many people, you now have to find someone who can teach the teacher. So I had the opportunity to work with my colleague in terms of trying to get her that certification as two of the few people who can speak Munsee to any level of degree. We also have language instruction at those elementary schools. So we do have pathways when our students leave the reserve to go to school, that they do have the opportunity to learn the language, and that happens at the elementary school, secondary, and occasionally at the universities, the University of Western Ontario. And one of the big pieces in the last 10 years that takes up a lot of time is translation work. So we have a lot of requests to translate documents for public health, especially during the COVID times, where you want to send out information in bilingual format, but also other communities would like translation work for things such as poetry. So we have a lot of requests when it comes into work on that. Getting to the actual COVID-19 pandemic, we had lots of programs running, and we'd have the weekly classes. We had another one of our weekend sessions set up at the community center to talk about cultural artifacts that had been taken from the community, and that all came to a crashing halt last March. And now we were faced with having to do things differently. We had talked, so Karen and I had talked, and the community had talked about potentially offering things online before, but we sort of pushed that to the side simply because time constraints and translation work, and then what are we going to do on the next session? We hadn't really ever given it any thought. But however, we sort of turned around very quickly, and in late April of 2020, we switched to offering the Munsee language online, which is a first for us. I don't know if it's not a first for other communities, but it was a first for us in terms of offering it in this format. And to be honest, we thought, we might get a few people, some diehards, you might get some people who are interested in learning the language. We put it out off of Facebook, we put it off of Twitter, Instagram, and we were really taken aback by the amount of interest in what people wanted to learn. They wanted to learn the language. So from April to August of 2020, we started off with one level of class twice a week, but then we had to break it down into a beginner 2, and an intermediate. So we're actually offering 3 different levels of class during that time because of the interest. you would start a class, then you'd finish it, but then there'd be new students that would want to come in to learn the language. So we tried to differentiate and give students the opportunity to really push their learning. Since September of 2020, we have partnered with the local Friendship Center, Namrand in London, to offer it's sort of a beginner intermediate class. And that's what we're currently working on right now with that partnership. Our class format works much this way. It works on, you introduce yourself much like what I did to start our session. We work on the prayer. So it's this day, and we include what the day is. So we build off the prayer and the introductions so that students can add on words or phrases to build their language capacity. We do some new learnings. So we try and tie this to land-based learning. And currently, because we're in the deep snow moon, we're talking about stories. And to the right of that, you'll see that I've taken a picture of what's called Each Peach Pear Plum, which is the kids' book. But I used to read that story to my daughter when she was a baby, but I used to translate it. So she wouldn't get it in English, she'd actually get it in Muncie. So part of our current projects are students actually have to translate some of their favorite kids' books, real simple stuff. And then the clip up at the top is actually a story that was shared to me by my great-grandfather when I was younger that I translated. So I'm going to offer that to the group this evening. So we're talking about story, but we're also trying to maintain that it's something that is attainable for students, that they can take simple stories, translate them and share them, but also try to share some of the story work that's important to the Munsee-Delaware Nation. Everybody's favorite is a Kahoot game. As long as the music's turned off. I don't like the music, but the students really do enjoy a Kahoot game. There's quite a rivalry, which, again, you have to turn the volume down because the noise can be pretty, I don't know, it's the smack talk, I guess. The smack talk gets pretty heated. There are homework challenges. So again, the homework challenge for this week, to give you an example, would be to translate some simple phrases from Don't Hop on Pop by Dr. Seuss, or Where is Green Sheep by Mem Fox. There's just simple pieces that the students are going to have to translate. And this is a 4 to 5 hours per week. So we have the 2 classes, Tuesdays and Friday evenings. But of course, oftentimes the class tends to overrun. So you could start at 6, but then you don't end up at 8:30. Lots of people have lots of questions. For a small community, we have a ton of support. So we've sort of harnessed the world of social media to its maximum. The only thing we haven't done is a TikTok, because not refuse, but I'm a little nervous. A lot of this, I've actually been pushed by other community members from other communities who have said, hey, you know what, you got to try this out. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. I'll see what I can do. But we have a Twitter account that we use to put out word of the day. So I use my own personal Twitter account to put that out, just to highlight and expose the Munsee language to those who might not know. We have 2 YouTube channels. So my colleague Karen has one and I have one, and those just to support the learning of the students who are taking our online classes. So that will include videos of, I think the last one I posted was about clothing, so the different clothing items, so they could do some translation work, but also, eating utensils, and also some of our community resources, so that people can actually hear the language. We have an Instagram account, Facebook. Facebook tends to be pretty good in terms of getting the message out for community members and those who are interested in language. And of course, email and text. And all of those involve that ability to interface and ask questions about the language. So our students are able to access us through those different mediums and ask questions, whether they're saying something right or whether they can push their own learning. And so I've added a few examples. Some of them colleagues in the language world shared with me that you got to create these, I forget what they call it, either they're GIFs or they're GIFs, and I always get that that thing wrong, but they've shared lots of really good ideas with me that I can use to sort of even promote my own learning as a teacher. The positives from our experience so far, we've been able to access our off-reserve community. And that's significant. If you're talking about a population that's, 600 people actually live off-reserve and have Munsee status, to offer language programs on community on a weekend for a 2-day weekend, you're only accessing, a very small part of your total population. So we've had lots of people from off-reserve here in Ontario or across Canada and the United States who've accessed the language opportunities. Teaching online and providing the coursework online has given access to all those that are interested. So not just Munsee-Delaware community members, but now we've got people who are interested in the language, they're interested in the history of the culture, but now they have an access point as well to learn more. We have offered 3 different levels of language instruction, which is huge because at current there's just the 2 of us. So there's the 2 teachers. And when you're teaching 3 different classes per week, that adds up awfully fast. And also in terms of your prep time, in terms of making sure that the materials are ready for each class. The key number for us that was really surprising, and we never thought this was going to happen, but at last count, if I took a look at the email by which to send all the information out ahead of time, we have almost 100 people who have been part of the language programs at one time. They're not necessarily there now, but they have accessed us to learn the language. The dialogue has been incredible in terms of talking with people in terms of their learning and their learning journey with the language, or why they're interested in learning the language. We've held a virtual immersion weekends, and I must admit that was a little daunting for me because you're basically giving up your weekend to be on Zoom for an entire weekend. And I don't know, I'm sure many of you are Zoom fatigued, but we were that at one time we were that enthusiastic, and we held an immersion weekend last October that blended both culture, history. We had special guests. We engaged other community members to share what they've learned or they're learning. And we decided to dip back into the world of a Zoom immersion weekend, with another one planned for April and May of 2021. Probably the highlight of all of this is that the cost is free. It's not exactly free. This is grant writing season, so I'm the midnight candle is burning down to the nubbins in terms of writing the grants that sort of support the language programs home. So while technically the cost is free for those to join, the Zoom license and the internet costs are also a piece that needs to be factored in. So, but the actual cost to join the language is absolutely free. We have had we've had a tremendous amount of support from the community, and that does need to be highlighted, because that's not always been something that one could count on, because there's lots of different things going on in community that require the focus of chief and council, and oftentimes language might not necessarily be at the top of that, just because of the social constraints and the need to really focus attention on other pieces. We also have had the support of the OFIFC, the Ontario Friendship Center, with NAMRIND, the Ontario Arts Council, as well as as Canadian Heritage. The other positive that happens out of this, and I'm assuming that this is more, it's part that's going to happen anyway when we held our face-to-face sessions, but that it's also a place of laughter, and it's a place to get together during these times. And that piece of the mental health piece, where sometimes the language learning didn't exactly go where you had thought you were going to have it by the end of the night, because, you know, people need to talk, people need to laugh, and that's what you need to do. Things that we're going to continue to develop, so things that we continue to talk about with the work that we're doing, is that we're going to try and make those connections to land-based learning through film and documentation that we can share online, but also in the hopes that we'll actually have face-to-face at some point in the future. We want to make it better accessible for on-reserve members, and that simply comes down to the fact that the internet has not been very good for internet members, or sorry, for reserve members. It's expensive, it's poor quality, so we have to come at this from a different angle. People wanted to access this today and are asking, is it going to be recorded? So that's partly that I'll share with them, but that we want to increase the access for reserve members. Levels of programming for different ages. So ours is an adult group mostly. We don't have any younger students that access our programs. So we want to make sure that we're developing programming for different ages, whether it's early years and as well from our K-12 students, things that maybe they could use in the schools. Again, we want to continue with our resource development, whether that could involve independent learning of the Munsee language and providing those check-ins. Our online teaching ability. I was a classroom teacher for almost 20 years, but the world of online is got its own challenges, right? And that's partly where, as two teachers, we want to improve our abilities to provide the learning, as well as to improve the objectives. So if intermediate students are wanting to push their learning and become more fluent, then what are we going to do for them? Beginners, what do they want to learn? How do we get them on that same pathway? And again, with the technology, learning and adapting and discovering, the best way I can describe it is that, you know, there's breakout rooms in Zoom. I have yet to figure that out, simply because I come back to that old quote, I'm too busy teaching it or revitalizing it to actually take a break and go, oh, okay, I got to figure out these Zoom rooms today. So, but it's key to really harness the technology and so that it makes the learning experience better for all. The unexpected. We've had participants from across North America and Europe during our time. So we've had, of those 100 people, we have had people from as far west as Vancouver. We've had people from Sweden. We've had people from Florida. So it's all points in terms of people accessing our coursework. People from Europe had to actually, you know, get on at close to, well, after midnight. Would they be on after midnight to join our class? So, you know, that was tough for them. The other piece that was unexpected is the determined participation of the group to continue learning. So we have a core group of about 20 people who've been with us since last April, who are continuing to learn, and to notice their improvements in how they say the prayer, say their introduction, is incredible. The willingness to do homework is a huge one, because, you know, we're not face to face. I can't check your work, or I can't help you in the same way. But you know, they do their work. They come ready and they present it. It's amazing. The unexpected was switching the program to online. We never sort of figured we'd ever have to do that. That there would still always be the face-to-face option. But it's been incredibly seamless, I would argue. The work from face-to-face and then going into this online teaching mode. And the key piece is that the passion for language learning has been huge, by the participants, by the teachers, by the support of the community, and from others, from other communities who've offered their support. So Hwisiu means to speak loud. So I do want to acknowledge the hard work of the Munsee-Delaware community. We are very small in terms of population, less than 1,000 people, but there's a lot of people doing a lot of hard work there, including the language teachers, offering that consistent programming that people can rely upon, mobilizing the support. So we've had lots of support from people who are writing grants for us, or writing material for us, printing, doing the graphic design. Our community artists are working hard to illustrate that print work, and then also the collaboration from within the community. elders to guide our work. And then, of course, I wanted to say also thank you, Anishik, to other communities that have offered their unique ideas and perspectives on how to do things. And that includes the Cree communities, Gwich'in communities, and then also the Mississaugas here in Ontario. So what I'll do, I think I've actually timed this fairly well, but I'll open it up for questions or comments, and then I'll also leave my contact there as well. Anishik.
Well, thank you so much, Ian. So if anyone wants to just unmute themselves and ask a question, feel free, or to type into the chat as well.
Yes, my name is Aina. I'm sorry I was a few minutes late. I'm from the Wichí community in the north part of Argentina, but I'm doing my PhD now in California, San Diego. So I'm really, it's wonderful the work that you're doing. I first wanted to say that I'm inspired by what you're doing and thinking about learning from that. So I had two questions specifically. One had to do with methodologies for teaching the indigenous language. I know like bilingual teachers, they have access to, not in the indigenous context, but they have access to different methodologies, like how to teach a second language, or in this case, native second language. So I was wondering if you have learned a little bit from it or have some suggestions about approaches that turn more effective in teaching, in the methodology of teaching an indigenous language. And the second one was about the literacy part. Is it an expected outcome that they are also able to write, or is it a focus on the oral, or how do you deal with the written part of the language?
Well, the methodology piece, I still struggle with, and I guess I'd be remiss to say that I've really pushed it off because I've tried to be respectful of the language and the people, in that whatever method I choose, or for my own PhD research, has to be ultimately respectful and important to the Munsee people. And I don't want to, what's good for other languages or what's good for other Indigenous people or how they see research should be done is still a piece that I struggle with. I can leave it at this, though, that I'm still looking for Indigenous methodologies that will guide my ultimate research. And I've done a lot of looking around at with Margaret Kovach, looking at work by Marie Baptiste, by McKeever and Hinton, and just looking for guidance. And I got to admit, I still struggle in terms of applying appropriate methodologies for the work, because it all comes down to a language that's not spoken by very many people. It's in an endangered status, and it's unique. The other piece is that I'm looking, we do, I guess, in terms of the online work, we do highlight on the oral as opposed to the written aspect of the language. Yes, I guess the literacy part, the written part, is important. However, unless the language learners actually reach out and say, hey, can you check over what I've written? We haven't actually approached that as a means of evaluating whether they're getting closer to fluency. So I guess in that way, we've actually been more true to the world of Indigenous languages, and in particular the Munsee language, in terms of that you're learning by oral as opposed to listening and speaking as opposed to writing things down. I'm mindful of that. An elder once shared, as I was going out with him to learn about plants in the forest, and I had my pencil and paper handy because I wanted to write the words down. He goes, you can't do that. So why can't I do that? I want to know, I want to record this so I can think about it later. And he said, whatever you were supposed to take in on this walk, you will take in. And I'm mindful of that. Now he's passed, so a lot of knowledge actually passed with him, but I'm mindful of those learns that you're supposed to be present at the time, and you'll take in what you need from that particular session. But as you know, in the future, yes, we would be looking at sort of looking at the writing aspect of it. I'm not sure if that answered your question. I probably muddled my way through. That's all right.
Great. Ian, you have some questions in the chat. Should I read them, or
Okay.
are you able to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me take a look.
Okay.
Is it JD or Jadi?
JD, yes.
Okay. What amazing work you do. I'm curious to know the impacts of Indigenous language learning on social, emotional learning, healing within the community. And I love that question because it comes back to that whole decolonization piece. If I could speak, and I know my mom's online, so she could probably clarify or correct me if I'm wrong, but my association with the community goes back to 1972 when I was born. I would argue that there were very few people that could speak the language at that point. And then if you traveled all the way through the 80s in terms of people dealing with shame and the pressures of all of the things that have happened to Indigenous people, the language simply didn't exist, right? It existed with the older people of the community. I would argue in the 1990s, you have a period where people are skeptical. So when I restarted my language journey in the 1990s, nobody really wanted to know. It was great, but it wasn't important. And also there's suspect. Why would you want to learn that? You're only going to ruin your ability to work in the English world. Furthering on into into this new millennial, you've got to switch now. And people often talk about the 7 generations and the change that's needed. I look at it this way: if it took almost 150 years for the language to be pretty much destroyed for our community, it's going to take that long to bring it back. And I will say, in the last 10 years, the support, the interest, it has been outstanding. And we have a saying between the two of us, Karen and I. So we'll build it in the hopes that people will come. I'm not forcing people, and I don't believe that. I want to make sure that it exists for them, and it exists for my kids and their kids in the next generation. It would be wrong for me to have this ability to just let it go and not go down without a fight. So it's important that it'll be there for the people when they're ready to come back to it. It may not be this generation, but it may be the next. And I think that's pretty critical.
Hey, Ian. Good to see you again.
Yeah, hi, Tyler.
I had a couple questions for you. The first one, when you indicated you had people from far and wide attending, including some from Europe, I was just curious, were these people who were curious about the language, or were they actually Delaware descendants that had spread far and wide?
The couple people that joined us actually were part of a language class that was held through I think it's CKQ at the University of Toronto. So it's the Indigenous not student association, but the Indigenous Heart House. And I think that they do through Jenny Blackbird, they do a language session monthly on a Wednesday night, and they highlight different languages that are spoken across Canada and North America. And I believe that the two people that attended were either associated with the University of Toronto or were students or had heard through just social media, and they joined in. So they weren't relatives, or they weren't people who had ties to the Delaware world, but they were very interested in the language.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Second question I had, you seem to have found some good success with online. So thinking forward, once we're all past COVID, and hopefully that's sooner rather than later, ambitions to continue with online, or do you prefer the in-person if you can, or a combination of both?
It most likely will be a combination of both. So, plans, at this point, we can't not offer this. It does offer people that connection during the week. My colleague likes to travel to New York to offer classes in face-to-face. She also travels to New Jersey and does the same. I'm not so, I don't like changing the tires on my car that much. So probably we will continue to do online, but in addition, we will always do the face-to-face, because it is important to sort of connect ourselves back to our community and to the land that we're from, and offer face-to-face to the community as well. So I would suggest a blended. It just, we'll have to see what our time's like. I'm not getting any younger.
Hey, Ian, there's a question above that, the one of JD.
Is it JC?
Yeah, by JC.
JC, okay, just reading it now. Wondering specific examples of how we can include the language in primary classrooms, not taking a whole social studies lesson to teach language, but to include basic words like hello, thank you, goodbye, word walls. That's a great question. So within my work as a teacher, I also had the role of as an Indigenous resource teacher for Simcoe County District School Board. And we have Rama students, we have students from Christian Island, but we also have, with the construction of the casino at Rama, we also had different Indigenous people come in. So people that spoke Mohawk. And oftentimes, what I would suggest to primary teachers is, yeah, you can add in the words. There's lots of videos out there support. And to be honest, that's sort of one of the background reasons for creating those YouTube videos, is that the hope that teachers within the Thames Valley District School Board or Lambton, Kent would want to access those videos to support their programming. If they had students in their class, or even if they wanted to embed the different languages within their classroom. So, I mean, I think that's great. With guest speakers, it's tough with languages that have very few speakers, only because of our time is very split 25 different ways from Sunday. However, with bigger communities, definitely there are people who you could access. Usually I like to go through the culture centers of First Nations communities, because they've got a good handle on who's a speaker, who would be really good to come into the classroom. I don't know if that answers the question. We once spent a morning with my grade 8s, and I spoke nothing but Munsee to them, and it was sort of an exercise in terms of understanding what it was like to go to a school that demanded you to speak only English. So how well can you survive?
Great, thanks, Ian. And we have another question from Michin. Joey, you.
This is the motivation question. Wondering about the motivations of the participants in the program. Are they from the Muncie community, or are they simply curious and interested in the language? They are a very diverse group. I will give you that. There are professors in our group, both from here in Ontario and from the United States, that are interested in the language from a family perspective, and then also from the perspective of many of the people come from the Muncie homelands. Well, not the Hoking, which is New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. We have a lot of people from from that area who take the language. These classes also provide an opportunity to discuss. So it's almost like it's a culture, history, discussion of language where we really break down words that have appeared in history books, key people in Muncie history, the forced migration up the Susquehanna River to Niagara Falls and then across. It's I think it's people that are interested. Language is definitely their primary interest because they wouldn't probably keep coming, but they also have that interest in knowing more about this Indigenous group of people, and they want to learn from community members. A lot of them have read lots of books, historical books, and also contemporary on the Munsee people, but they also want to learn from people from community and maybe hoping to hear things that you're just not going to hear or read about. So I think that might also be another motivation for people.
Great. Thank you, Ian. I actually had a question as well. I was wondering, sort of how does the age groupings work? Because I imagine you get a lot of different ages. Is it all together and it sort of works out well, or?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Our current group of students, the 20, would range from in their 20s to in their 70s. So we have a range of about. That's our current range. A lot of them are university students as well, or college students that are giving up their time to join in.
Yeah, great. And are there sort of special classes for children offered, or that's more through school?
Yeah, that's the challenge. We don't have any programming for the younger kids, at least online, and that's something we want to address in the upcoming couple of years with potential grants. Is that we want to really highlight the early literacy and the early learning of our community members, like offered pieces to the daycare and the Head Start programs. To work on that next generation of potential speakers, and then work with their parents as well.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions for Ian? Can feel free to type it in or to make a comment.
Well, I appreciate the comments in the chat. I mean, the comment about language is the key to open up a new world of culture. It's that's key. You know, whatever language you learn. I've learned Oneida and I've learned Chippewa over my time, just so that I knew what the kids were calling me on the schoolyard. And I've also learned French as part of the public school programming. And language learning doesn't come easy for me. I'm not someone who's got a gift with it, but I do appreciate it, and I do appreciate the perspective that it brings when you do learn new words in a new language. So it's a lot of fun, and it's something that I'll continue to do my entire life.
Wonderful. Oh, Ian, there's a hand up.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, from.
Wabishko, Maingan.
Honey,
bonjour.
I had I'm from Alderville, and our last fluent speaker would have been my grandmother, who passed on before I was born, and so a lot of what we've been doing is partnering with Curve Lake and neighboring communities, and I'm just curious, with your program over there, have you seen strengthening of partnerships between communities over there, maybe Moravian Town, and like with documentation too, especially like audio documentation? Is there been work maybe turning things into podcasts, making things more accessible for people, that kind of thing? Because I commute and like to go for walks and that kind of thing, wash dishes, go for runs.
Yeah, you know what, and I appreciate the work that that the Mississauga people have done. I was going to talk with Sean Conway and Kim Muskrat about the videos that have been created in the language, the culture, and to share those. I thought that was a really unique idea done by the 5 communities. You know what, all those are ideas that we love to do. We have had partnerships with Moravian Town in the past, and there's conversation between the two in terms of sort of developing a language strategies policy. And, you know, in the nature of the world, in the way things go, people come in, people go out. And the sort of last 10 years has been a focus on our community, just sort of, for a better word, for the people who are there to really sort of pick up your socks and let's make this happen. So we've you know, with the support of Moravian Town, because there are more speakers there and they've had more experience with the language, but as well, it's been a real emphasis on so what can we do at Munsee-Delaware to pick up some slack and really develop things. Podcasts would be awesome. We just purchased a microphone to start to do that kind of work, but also to create the film work for documentation, but, you know, film, you know, some pieces around the community and share that. Those are all things that are definitely excite me and keep me up at night and wanting to do. So you know, I appreciate the, you know, highlighting those suggestions. And again, yeah, you absolutely, we need to, I would argue we need to work closer with our Delaware cousins at Moravian Town.
Great, Ian. That brings us to 1 o'clock pretty much. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming and speaking, and thank you to everyone. And yeah, I hope to see everyone again. We have more events coming up soon, more student speaker events. So check out the Eventbrite page to find out more. Thank you.
Anishik, Wemoen, thank you everybody. Enjoy your Friday. Happy weekend.